Oh, hi there. It's so good to see you. No, come in, come in. Have a seat. Have a seat. Would you like some coffee maybe or some tea? I even have some cookies. Oh, oh, you're here to get a book recommendation. I see. Well, fortunately for you, I have a good one for you today. I know you're a really big horror fan, so I want to talk to you today about My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I know in the horror world, big names like Stephen King and Dean Koontz are usually who we think of when we think of horror, but Stephen Graham Jones is pretty darn good. He's a Native American writer. He's been writing for quite a while, and these are some of his newer books. Um, Enough about the author. Let's talk about what the book is about. I know you are a huge slasher fan, and so am I. I grew up with movies like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. I grew up going to the video store and looking at those covers going, yeah, I want to bring that home with me. But this book takes slashers to a whole nother level. The main character's name is Jade Daniels. She's in high school, bit of an outcast, but for more than just being, a little weird, she's also Native American. She's also quite poor. And she lives at home with her father, who is a not great kind of guy. When we first meet Jade, you think of her as sort of that teenage, angsty, typical teenager until you get her home. You realize that her relationship with her father and her father's friend Rexall is kind of toxic, and you start to really feel for how Jade has been failed, not just by her parents, but by everyone. She works as a janitor at the elementary school and around town. Um, but everybody sort of turns a blind eye to what's going on with her, unless she's getting in trouble. One thing that you learn about Jade early on is how deeply she understands uh, slashers. She knows the rules backwards and forwards and almost lives her life according to those rules. It almost seems like she doesn't live in reality because of this. So when bad things start happening at a development happening across the lake in Proof Rock, people start disappearing, and Jade is investigating because Jade kind of wants a slasher to happen in Proof Rock. She wants them all. She wants something to happen. She wants to be there to support the final girl because Jade feels like she could never be the final girl. And they don't really talk about why that is, other than she's a badass and she's, not your typical white girl. Which kind of brings into question that whole concept of the final girl. If you haven't heard of this before, it's really interesting. A final girl in any horror movie is the last one to survive. She's considered pure because she hasn't engaged in sexual activity, she hasn't done any drugs, and the people around her are smoking, drinking, having sex on the beach, you know, doing things that normal teenagers might do. But because she's pure, she ends up in this final confrontation with a killer. And one of two things happens. Either the final girl finds this amazing inner strength and attacks and kills the killer, or they're rescued by an authority figure. That authority figure is usually a cop and is definitely always male. So Jade doesn't see herself as being one of those final girl types. Jade meets a new girl in school named Letha Moondragon, whose father is a multimillionaire who's spearheading the building of some mansions across the lake in a place called Terra Nova, which is an interesting name for a place that's been taken from a nature refuge. Not a whole lot of people are actually really happy about this, besides the fact that it's generated a few jobs, especially Jade's history teacher. Mr. Holmes, he's not happy about it at all. And he's known for flying a small plane over in that direction to get a peek at what's going on in Terra Nova. Throughout the novel, we see people dying, being killed, and Jade sort of trying to help the police in her own way while following Letha around, trying to give her hints about how to survive, how to be the final girl. Jade suspects several people, including Theo Moondragon, who is Letha's father. All this is leading up to July the 4th, which is a huge thing in Proof Rock. On the lake, they all get together and watch on a giant screen Jaws while everybody floats around in parade floats, essentially, sort of themed. However, one thing I really enjoyed about this was Jade trying to help Letha, and Letha just sort of being oblivious, like not really understanding what Jade is trying to go for, other than seeing a project, which made me really feel bad for Jade. Jade is very much been failed by the people around her. She's been failed by the school system. She's been failed by the people who supposedly care for her. Uh, her father and mother are separated. Her mother doesn't even really talk to Jade. Jade's relationship with her is essentially going into Dollar General and stealing things in front of her mother and walking out with. Jade feels like they are too damaged. And that's really disheartening. There's a little bit of hint about what why Jade might feel that way, but it's covered up by this investigation into slashers, an investigation into murders that are happening. Towards the end of the book, and this is a little bit of spoilers, so if you haven't read this yet, stop now. Jade is on a yacht with Letha spending the night, and they are watching a slasher. Jade has been camping out at their local version of Crystal Lake, which is called Camp Blood. Um, there is a legend that a witch was, or a little girl that they suspected to be a witch, was thrown out onto the lake. And because she couldn't go underwater, she ran across the top of the lake. And that's sort of her thing. She kills people. Jade thinks it might be her. Jade also thinks it could be someone playing her. Jade thinks it can be a lot of people. In trying to communicate this to Letha and the police, it ends up basically being an intervention. And Mr. Holmes and the sheriff, Hardy, um, try to help her. They try to help her by keeping her away from the July the 4th festivities. And that's sort of back. Letha end up running through the woods, running away from Letha's father. They end up hiding in a pile of dead elk. I want to say a pile of dead elk, I mean a pile of dead elk. They burrow into a tunnel, they're inside of it, they're hiding from the father, and it collapses on them. I really feel like this pile of dead elk was sort of a call out to one of Stephen Graham Jones's better known novels, The Only Good Indians. Most people hadn't really heard of him until that came out, and I'm pretty sure it ended up on the New York Times bestseller. And it really prominently features the dead. In the end, you don't really know who the killer is. You have an idea, but is it this supernatural being dragging people to their death? Is it Theo Moondragon, who is maybe just not right in the head? We don't know. What we do know is that in the end, Jade rescues Letha. And when she thinks Letha is dead, Jade becomes the final girl. This is a big deal for me because Jade steps outside of that normal perception of the pure one. She's goth, she's damaged, she's Native American, she's not perfect, and she's not brave. She's scared. And even though she's scared, she's still fighting to save people. She's still fighting for her town. And this town who's basically failed her, she's still fighting to save people because she cares. Doesn't want to admit she cares, but she cares. And there's this part towards the end, which you would think would resolve some of her trauma, but really it doesn't. Jade saves the day, and Jade's the final girl. And I think that's really important to remember, that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be courageous. Bravery is found in being scared and still facing what you're scared of. It's not just being selfless, it's being selfish and recognizing that you're selfish because you want to survive too. There's always a part of you that wants to survive, even as you're laying there dying from your wounds or, drowning, facing unimaginable horror. Jade still saves her town. And I think that part lends itself to making this a fantastic book. So, in closing, I highly recommend the first part in the Indian Lake trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. Don't quote me on that. But at least the first book, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones.